Every day, thousands of ships move between Europe and Asia. Oil, food, weapons, raw materials. Nearly 15% of global trade passes through a single man-made scar on the map. Most people think empires are built with armies. History disagrees, because the greatest empire of the modern world wasn't secured by conquest, it was secured by a shortcut. No war was declared, no capital was captured, no king was overthrown. Instead, one narrow canal quietly decided who could trade, who could move troops, and who could dominate the world economy. Britain didn't conquer this power, it bought it, and in doing so, it discovered a rule that still governs success today. Those who control the flow don't need to control the land. This is the story of the Suez Canal and how owning a shortcut became more powerful than ruling nations. For as long as civilizations traded, they dreamed of one thing above all else: a faster way through. Long before satellites, before steam engines, before global empires, merchants understood a brutal truth: distance is power. Whoever shortened it ruled. As early as ancient Egypt, pharaohs tried to carve a waterway linking the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. The Persians attempted it, the Romans studied it, the Ottomans abandoned it. Every empire saw the same vision, and every empire failed. The land between the seas was hostile, the engineering was brutal, the cost was catastrophic. So trade continued the long way around Africa, a journey of months, storms, disease, and shipwrecks. By the 19th century, this inefficiency had become unbearable. Europe was industrializing at lightning speed. Factories demanded raw materials. Empires depended on Asian trade routes. And Britain's crown jewel, India, lay half a world away. The faster goods could move, the faster wealth accumulated. And whoever controlled that speed would dominate the century. Into this obsession stepped an unlikely figure. Ferdinand de Lesseps was not an engineer. He wasn't a general. He had no great fortune of his own. What he did have was something far more valuable: access. Years earlier, de Lesseps had served as a diplomat in Egypt. He spoke the language, he knew the court, and more importantly, he knew the ambitions of Egypt's ruler, a man desperate to modernize, to impress Europe, and to secure his place in history. De Lesseps didn't sell a canal. He sold a vision where Egypt would become the crossroads of the world, where Europe would bow to geography, and where a narrow strip of desert would transform into the most valuable passage on Earth. In 1854, with nothing more than persuasion and promises, Ferdinand de Lesseps secured the concession to build the Suez Canal. On paper, it looked like progress. In reality, it was the beginning of a power shift the world wouldn't fully understand until it was too late. The dream was intoxicating, but dreams don't cut through stone. The moment construction began, reality struck back. The land between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea was not empty desert. It was brutal terrain, shifting sands, salt marshes, unforgiving heat. There were no machines capable of the task. No modern dredgers, no safety systems. So Egypt paid with what it had in abundance: human labor. Tens of thousands of workers were forced into the project. Disease spread quickly. Deaths mounted quietly, and costs spiraled far beyond the original estimates. But once money starts moving, stopping becomes impossible. European investors poured in. Governments watched closely. Everyone understood the same thing. If this canal succeeded, it wouldn't just shorten a trade route, it would rearrange global power. By the time the canal opened in 1869, the celebration was magnificent. Emperors arrived. Fireworks lit the desert sky. The world applauded what looked like a triumph of progress. But beneath the spectacle was a dangerous truth. Egypt had paid far too much. The ruler who had championed the canal, Khedive Ismail, had borrowed relentlessly to modernize his country. Railways, palaces, armies, and now the canal. The shortcut worked. Ships sailed through. Trade accelerated. But Egypt's finances collapsed. Debt tightened like a noose. And in moments of desperation, power always changes hands. Because when a nation can't pay its bills, it doesn't lose territory first. It loses leverage. And the most valuable leverage Egypt possessed was no longer land, or armies, or even sovereignty. It was paper. Shares in the canal that now carried the world's commerce. Egypt didn't need a partner anymore. It needed cash, immediately. And somewhere in Europe, someone was watching and waiting. By 1875, this was no longer a negotiation. It was a race. Egypt was days away from financial collapse. Debt payments swallowed the state. Foreign creditors hovered, and once the news broke, the opportunity would vanish. Khedive Ismail didn't need partners anymore. He needed cash. Now, there was only one asset powerful enough to save him. Not Egypt itself, not land, not armies, just the shares. Quietly, without announcement or auction, Ismail put Egypt's stake in the Suez Canal up for sale. This wasn't diplomacy, it was desperation. When word reached London, Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli understood immediately. This was not a business opportunity. It was a strategic opening. Britain didn't need to conquer Egypt. It needed the artery that fed its empire. India, Asia, trade, troops. Whoever controlled the canal controlled all of it. But time was the enemy. Parliament would argue, rivals would intervene, and delay would kill the moment. So Disraeli bypassed debate entirely. He moved first. Within days, financing was secured through a private intermediary. The money changed hands quietly. The contracts were signed quickly. And before Europe could react, Britain owned Egypt's shares in the Suez Canal. No invasion, no treaty, no war, just a signature. Overnight, Britain didn't rule Egypt. But Egypt could no longer act without Britain, because control of the canal meant control of revenue, control of movement, control of access, and access is power. Egypt had built the shortcut. Britain now owned the leverage. The world still saw flags and borders, but real power had already moved, from land to flow. And once power shifts that way, it almost never moves back. Once Britain secured control of the canal, the effects were immediate. Ships that once took months to reach India now arrived in weeks. Troops moved faster than rivals could respond. Trade routes bent toward London. The British Empire didn't expand its borders that day. It compressed distance. And distance, once conquered, became dominance. The canal quickly turned into the empire's main artery. Oil, cotton, tea, weapons, everything that mattered passed through a single corridor of water. Britain didn't need to rule Egypt directly. It only needed to ensure that nothing moved without its approval. It was the same advantage Jakob Fugger once held over kings, and the same position Rockefeller later built in oil. Control the flow, and power follows. Soon, financial control became political reality. When unrest threatened the canal, Britain intervened temporarily. Troops arrived to protect stability. Administrators followed. That temporary presence stretched into decades. Egypt still had a ruler, still had a flag, still had borders, but its most valuable asset was no longer its own. The canal dictated policy. The canal dictated alliances. The canal dictated who could afford independence and who could not. Britain didn't need to announce dominance. The numbers did that quietly. Trade surged. Costs fell. Rivals lagged behind. While other empires debated expansion, Britain had already secured the advantage that mattered most: movement. And once an empire controls movement, it controls outcomes. The canal had become more than infrastructure. It was leverage, silent, constant, and irreversible. More than a century later, the world likes to believe it has moved on. Empires have fallen. Colonies are gone. Maps have been redrawn. Britain no longer controls the Suez Canal. Ownership returned to Egypt decades ago, but the shortcut remained. Every year, trillions of dollars worth of goods still pass through the same narrow corridor. Oil, food, electronics, raw materials. Then, in 2021, the world was reminded of an uncomfortable truth. One ship stopped moving. The Evergiven ran aground in the Suez Canal, blocking it completely. Within hours, hundreds of ships were stranded. Within days, global supply chains began to unravel. Factories slowed, energy prices spiked, markets reacted. Not because a country had declared war, but because a shortcut had disappeared. For nearly a week, the global economy waited helplessly while engineers tried to free a single vessel. That moment revealed what had always been true. Power doesn't belong to those who move the most goods. It belongs to those who decide where goods are allowed to move. The same logic that once empowered empires still governs success today. Modern power isn't loud. It isn't ceremonial. And it rarely announces itself. It sits quietly at choke points, at gateways, at platforms everyone depends on and no one can easily replace. The lesson of Suez is not about Britain. It's not even about Egypt. It's about positioning. Those who build shortcuts don't always win. but those who control them rarely lose. History doesn't reward those who work the hardest. It rewards those who position themselves closest to leverage. Empires rose believing land was power. Others believed armies decided history. But the winners understood something colder and far more durable. Control the flow, and outcomes follow. Jakob Fugger didn't need a crown. Rockefeller didn't need an army. Britain didn't need to conquer Egypt. They positioned themselves where movement, money, and dependence converged. The Suez Canal wasn't just a shortcut across water. It was a shortcut across centuries, a lesson repeated again and again by those who win quietly. In every era, the game looks different, but the rule never changes. Success doesn't come from owning everything. It comes from owning what everyone else must pass through. And once you understand that, you stop chasing power and start designing it.